to thank you all for coming. I hope that you'll learn something today. I want to divide the world into three people today, just for the purposes of this meeting. We have the well-informed, the uninformed, and the mal-informed. If you're here, I hope you're part of the first group. If you're not, you just drop in for the cookies. Maybe you'll learn something. And if you're in the third group, well, we want to keep everybody out of the third group, and that's what we're going to address today. Our speaker, Lyle Troxell, has been intersecting with media and information for at least the last 18 years as a moderator on Geek Speak, which was on the radio station. And full disclosure here, my son Miles has been a frequent panel member over the years. And Lyle also has worked at UCSC developing a master's program in media arts.
Digital arts and new media.
Say it again.
Digital arts and new media.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And he has quite a presentation for you. And for me, I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot today from it. So we have handouts here. I hope you've signed in so we can keep in touch with you. And take it away, Lyle.
Thank you. We don't have the room mic today, so if you're having trouble hearing me, I suggest moving closer. There's chairs right there. I want to invite you. First off, I have everything I'm presenting today, all the slides I'm presenting, and the notes that some of the notes I'm saying are actually available here for you if you'd like to go to this URL and download them. I'm going to go there real quick because I really want to welcome you to do so. If you go to that page, I think it's up now, there's a feedback link. This is basically a Google form that gives me feedback on what you think. And it's anonymous, so fill it out and tell me what you think, because I can't get better unless I hear what I'm doing wrong. So please, later on, don't do it right now, go here and you can look at the slides and stuff. At the very end of the slides, I've got all the links that I collected as I did this presentation. So if you'd like resource information on what I'm talking about, that's where it is. But I really would appreciate feedback so I can get better at doing this. Thank you. I want to make, yes?
Should we close those curtains so we can see better?
Would it be easier to see?
Yeah.
Let's do that then. Thank you so much. No, it's great.
Can you leave your address, the URL?
I'll have it at the very end. When a Q&A slides up, it'll be up the entire time. You can copy that down.
We'll have it in a voter, too, when we write an article for our main voter.
Okay. I want to make everything we do, of course, is derivative, and so everything that we present and talk about and think about actually comes from other people, and the people that help influence me on these are Miles Elam, my co-host of Geek Speak for 18 years. Miles and I have been having conversations about technology and social change weekly for an hour and publishing it online and through radio. So Miles influences me quite a bit, and I rely upon him and his wisdom. In the Q&A section of today, we'll invite Miles up to join me so I don't sound as stupid as I actually am. I also want to thank my wife, Maggie Hoogs, which makes a lot of my life possible. And again, she's somebody I bounce ideas off of, and she gives me some guidance. Some of the talk today will have some added benefit that we had over breakfast this morning. And I also want to thank Warren Sack. He's a professor of digital media up at UCSC. He was the chair of the Digital Arts and New Media program. And he's a good friend of mine and knows a lot about media in general. So when I sent an email to him and said, hey, when we were talking over beers about blah, 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 he gave me a 14-page response, which I stole graciously for these slides. I'm going to talk about ownership of media, the making of services, and bias's existence. Before I do that, a theme that's going to come out throughout these slides is small effects. So I'm going to start with small effects and what I mean by that. Obviously, small effects are small. Norbert Wiener's 1948 book, Cybernetics, or Control and Communication in the Animal and the Machine, is an amazing book. He lays out theoretical foundations for servo mechanisms analog computing, artificial intelligence, neuroscience, reliable communications, and automatic navigation. And this is 1948. In the chapter Feedback and Oscillation, he kind of talks about the concept of negative feedback, of changing a system by a feedback mechanism that corrects. And he talks about that with regards to railway signaling, because of course at the time that was high art, the operation of a thermostat, the steam engine centrifugal governor, the thing that actually slows the engine down, and also in this book he describes the mathematics of figuring out how an automatic navigation system would work. So let's talk about an automatic navigation system, okay? We'll just do that with a boat and a little bit of animation. As a boat is moving forward, when you want to steer it to a certain location, you give it a slight adjustment to its trajectory. When wind influences the boat or other things influence the boat, like tide, again, you adjust small sets. The entire time, you're not telling the boat where to go, you're directing the boat which direction to lead. And that small change over time leads, of course, to precision and great change. So the small effect of that direction has a very large consequence, a big consequence. Very small effects can have big consequences. We know that when we look at poll numbers, for example. A 2% lead's a problem for the other candidate. You don't need much to win in a bio-deposed democracy, right? You just need a little tiny percentage. So there's large effects. Throughout my talk, I'll be coming back to this idea of small effects having big consequences. My name is Lyle Troxell, and as Caroline mentioned, I have hosted Geek Speak on KOSP for years, and after that as a podcast. And I've been doing it for 17 years. We're in our 18th season right now. Miles and I have been talking weekly, as I mentioned. And we talk about society and technology. I also worked at the Arts Division at UCSC for 11 years, and I helped run a high-tech arts program in digital arts and new media. It was a Masters of Fine Arts program. It is still kind of going on. I hear there's budget problems. Maybe I shouldn't have left. But I did leave. I went to Netflix, and at Netflix I work as a software engineer, and I work on the iOS application. So if you've ever looked at Netflix on an iPhone or an iPad, it's the best way, by the way. That's what I work on. I also started a new podcast at Netflix called We Are Netflix, and it talks about the culture of Netflix, which I'm pretty passionate about. And you can listen to the first episode. We talk a bit about that. The second episode, we're going to talk even more about it. Netflix does some things that are different. All right, let's talk about ownership. Ownership of media is a big deal. It drives a lot of the bias in the news. When the former dean of the Berkeley School of Journalism wrote his book, The Media Monopoly, in 1983, he listed out large conglomerates that were in control of news. And he listed 50 of them. And it was shocking and scary and horrible that 50 companies controlled what was said in newspapers and television and so on in 1983. He then rewrote his book and re-released a second edition in 2004. It changed. There were only 5 companies at that time in charge of basically media in the United States. The Wikipedia area of this talks about these 5 companies, but also talks about 11 companies globally. You'll notice that AT&T is not in here. It's in the global space, but it's also, of course, dominant. When you want to talk about something like Fox News, for example, News Corp owns that. So in 2018, we're down to 4. It's getting worse. So what's the big deal? Who cares, right? Well, why ownership drives a lot of the bias in news is articulated very concisely by Edward S. Herman and Noam Chomsky, their book Manufacturing Consent, The Political Economy of the Mass Media, published in 1988. And in this book, among lots of other ideas, they point out a very obvious thing that occurs. If you're a journalist working for a paper owned by a corporation, you have an odd place to be. You're thinking about the ownership, and you're thinking about your job, and that little bit of thought of the ownership affects what you decide to research on. So, for example, the Washington Post, that's owned by Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos, of course, also owns a little company called Amazon. And therefore, when you're working for the Washington Post, you're working for Jeff Bezos, and you maybe, as the editor of the Washington Post, you know Jeff Bezos directly. It's not that you're going to do something that Amazon wants you to do. It's not like a collusion in that regard. It's more like a very subtle thing. You're less likely to do the research about Amazon. You're less likely to do the research about Whole Foods Market. Not because you think of Jeff as maybe punishing you, just because you know him, you're engaged, and there's a little bit of a bias. It's not a big effect. It's a really small effect. Unfortunately, it has a really big consequence. Now, this is doubly down problematic when you deal with a conglomeration, as I mentioned earlier, of 4 different companies in the U.S. controlling media. When it was distributed, severely distributed, even if a very small paper was owned by the local grocery store, that paper wouldn't write about the grocery store, but the town over, they'd have a paper, and they'd write about the grocery store. So the separation of ownership allowed for the cross-assessment and cross-media coverage, and so the effect is not as drastic. And in fact, the 2 papers might be rivals in that state, in that area, right? So you could get your information kind of from 2 different sources. As you condense those information sources, the motivations of those groups, of course, also are condensed, and you get in a situation where you can't get a truth about Amazon, for example. Unless you listen to Trump? No, that's not right. All right. Let's talk about making of services. And what the heck do I mean a making of a service? Well, Facebook is a service. It's a software service. And actually, so is Netflix a software service. And the way that we do software development in the Silicon Valley is we take advantage of a little methodology called A/B testing. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you about A/B testing, and I'll describe it to you. It is fundamental in how services change. When you say, oh, why'd they make this change? It's because of this that they made that change. It wasn't a person said, this is the best way to do this. It's because of this process. So, the first step in A/B testing is you just simply come up with an idea. The idea that we will use in this example, is we'll use Facebook, because it's fun to talk about Facebook. So we'll come up with an idea that's something they did a while ago, and we'll talk about how they did that. So the theory or the idea they came up with is that people will interact with our service more if we give them more emotional representation. So that's the neat-sounding theory that they want to test. People will interact with our service more if we give them more emotional representation. I'm making this up. I don't work for Facebook. I've interviewed people at Facebook. I've chatted with people on stage at Facebook. They do A/B testing a lot. But whether this was the idea behind why they did what they did, I'm not sure. But we'll move forward anyway because it's fun. So you start with an idea, and then you get a whole bunch of people. And when I say a whole bunch of people, I mean thousands and tens of thousands of people. At our A/B tests at Netflix, there's like 100,000 or 200,000 people involved in a test. And they don't know it. So now you do. You take those people and you randomly separate them out into 2 different groups. You split the population randomly. And normally that's done by, as someone logs in, you just decide that you're in one group and one group. And you label those groups, obviously, A and B. That's where the A/B test comes from. A and B, 2 different groups. And what you do is you separate what they experience. You split them up and you show them 2 different things. In one group, we'll call that the A group we'll call control for the test. You give them a like button like they're used to. This was years ago when they had just a like button. And they keep using it that way. They can like things and not like things. When their aunt posts a picture of the dog, they decide to like it with a thumbs up or to not. And that's all the choice they have. Or they can like it and unlike it, and like it and unlike it, like I did here. That's one group, the control. The second group gets the new thing. They, of course, get like, because they need to be able to like things. And they also get love. And they also get ha ha ha, whatever that is, and wow, and sad and angry. Group B sees a totally different experience on Facebook when they log into their phone or to the website than Group A. And the reason Facebook can do this, of course, is that they know who these people are, even though it was randomly selected. So for a period of time, 2 different groups on Facebook. And then the next step really is you just wait. At Netflix, we wait for about 3 months because the first month of Netflix is free, and the second month of Netflix, you get charged, and the third month, if you're still paying for it, you're probably going to stay around. So we do 3-month windows normally, and we look at how much people stay. At Facebook, I don't know how long they wait. They have a lot more users, like the planet, so they have a lot more opportunity. They could probably do a decision like this in a few days, potentially. So then at the end of that waiting period, whatever it is, the simple question is, who won? I mean, it's a test after all, right? So one group did better than the other group. And whoever did better, that's the experience everybody will get. Now, we all know, if we've used Facebook, anyone here used Facebook? Okay, a few people. The 6 emotion things, that's the thing that won. Now when you go on Facebook and you look at a dog, you have 6 decisions to make, 7 actually. Do nothing, get off Facebook and go have a tea. Or like it, love it, hate it, ha-ha it, sad it? I don't know what they are. Was that about them? Okay. So those are the choices you get, and that's what won. So the question is, what did Facebook decide was the winning state? What is winning for sorry, did I say Netflix? Facebook. What is Facebook's win for this test? Well, it's the goal, right? It's what their objective is. It's their guide for bias. It's what they want. So let's talk a bit about that. They want actually one very specific thing. They want people to engage with their service more. They want as many possible people acting like this animated GIF as possible. So their service experience is getting this person to do more. Why is that their goal? They're not making any money directly from this guy or from anybody that's on the service. They're making money from their advertisers. In fact, the Facebook's actual money-making scheme is get money from advertisers. Put those advertisements in front of people, and then the people either click on them, like them, sad them, whatever, but they engage with that ad. So the product, so the customer of Facebook very specifically are the advertisers. That is the customer for Facebook. And the product for Facebook is this dude. That's the product. So it's extremely important to understand when using that service and how they're motivated about Facebook's motivation. So the engagement with the ads, being on the service is one thing, but the engagement with the ads, reading the ads, clicking on the ads, engaging with them is their fundamental focus, right? Okay. So yeah, customer versus product. That question is not asked very much. In Congress last week, that question really wasn't addressed directly. It's kind of pitiful. But in any case, we'll move on. All right. So who does A/B testing? Everybody does it. All these software companies do it. Google does it. Twitter does it. And it's a little creepy. Did anyone know that you're being tested on all the time? Anybody here use Google? All the time. Miles used to work at Google. A/B testing at Google?
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So when I first heard about this, probably about 5 years ago, I was interviewing a set of panels. I had someone from Netflix and Facebook and from a small company up north that did a lot of contract work, and also from eBay. And this topic came up, and all the episodes after that for the next month or so was all about me and Miles talking about A/B testing and how odd it is that these companies are collecting data on all of us so that they can improve their product. And that's the thing that's really important about this A/B testing. The only way they can find out which cell won, which they should do with their product, how they can improve it, is by looking at the collected data of everybody. So it's in their best interest to improve their product, and it's in their best interest, therefore, to collect as much data as possible to improve their product. The side effect of having all that data is a different social problem altogether that potentially Facebook's not even looking at. But they probably are. In any case, the win for the test is based off of the experience people had and how well they collect the data and analyze it. And then they make a little change, because the little tricky thing about this is that the more data they collect and the easier it is to do that, the more software engineers like me they hire, the more likely they can produce more tests to improve the product a little bit. These A/B tests, though, what is that win? It's like fractions of a percent. You know, if you have that thumbs up versus the emotional thing up, and you get maybe 5% more engagement from your audience, a small percentage, really, it's millions and millions, billions of dollars potentially for Facebook. So very small changes can have really big consequences. That guidance of their product slowly shifting over time with these little tiny A/B tests that make it better and better at capturing attention is their goal. And the consequence of that is massive, as we've seen in our political sphere nowadays. All right, so I've talked about some small effects and ownership of media and making of software services. So now I'm going to speak about your bias. Because the reason it's important to understand your bias is the reason why that like versus the emotional buttons worked. It's not necessarily that Facebook knows why it's working. All they really know is it had a little bit of effect of their business. But us as individuals need to understand our bias so we know that that sad button really does mean something. It affects us to engage with it. That's why it's animated and looks fun. And our biases, our effect on how we engage with things, actually do control how these companies' products will change over time. So a great way to think about bias is this wonderful quote by Hank Green. And I'll read it for you before I show it to you. But I will show it to you too. And Miles threw this to me this morning, which is very useful. We shouldn't be asking whether we're being manipulated. All content is designed to affect. We should ask what we are being manipulated to do, to laugh, to understand, to buy, to give in to fear. Always ask yourself what content is trying to do to you. This falls into this whole idea of, oh, marketing's kind of evil. They're trying to manipulate you. Yeah, they're trying to manipulate you. A great definition of marketing, if you want to be on your toes about it, is that it's weaponizing logical fallacies. It's weaponizing your emotions to get an effect. That's why the beer commercials look the way they do, is to control how you think about it, or to affect you. Okay, so we have biases, and the best way to be protected by being manipulated by your bias is to understand your own bias. And we all have them, unfortunately. Anyone here not have any biases? I like the one that we all seem to be doing right now pretty well, and that is breathing. We have a severe bias for an atmosphere we can breathe. It's not a choice. And I'd argue that most of our biases are not choice. So let's take a look at this thing. Can anybody see this thing? You see some colors on the screen? You see the black dot in the very center? Cover one eye and focus on that black dot, if you can. And if you focus very specifically, and it works at this distance with the lights on, I don't even know, the color areas will fade away from view. Is anyone seeing that experience? Yeah. These stronger yellows will just blur away. And the reason is a completely biological one. You don't have a choice for that to happen or not. You can look at it. If you keep your eye still, it will happen. You move your eye, it'll shift back. Optical illusions are a trick, right? There's a way of manipulating your mind directly without your consent. You guys see a triangle. You might even see a Star of David. But I assure you there's no triangle, there's no star, there's not two triangles, not one triangle, there's no triangle there. Anybody see a triangle? I do. I see two of them. Or three Pac-Mans and some corners. We can't but not see that, right? We have to see that. It's part of our bias. It's part of our organic bias. Has anyone seen this picture before? Many times, right? So if you've seen the picture, you can see that there's two women. If you haven't seen the picture, at first you'll probably just see one woman. Anybody here seeing one woman? Okay, cool. So there's actually two women in this. There's a torso of a woman looking away, and there's an older woman looking down. The young woman looking down's jawline, she's looking away from us, is the nose of the older woman. So for the people that just went, oh, now unfortunately, you can't but not see two. And it's nothing we can do about it. Now I just toggle back and forth. So aggravating. The ear of the young woman is the eye of the older woman. And the necklace of the young woman is the mouth of the older woman. So once you're taught it, just happens. Look at the FedEx logo. Anybody seen the FedEx logo? It's a big arrow. It's also an E. Now that I've said that, next time you see a FedEx truck, you'll go, Lyle, because you'll never not see it. There's a big arrow in the middle of the FedEx logo. Okay, but on the slide of that. So this is neat. This is a parlor game. It's fun. We have a good time looking at these things, but it takes advantage of something that you cannot control about how you perceive the world. These things are amazing. Do you know that the moon's perspective size, the actual size, if you take a measurement from your perspective when it's on the horizon and when it's directly above you, is always the same size? But I've seen the moon all big. No, you haven't. Your brain told you it was big because it was closer to something big. When it's in the sky, there's no reference point, so it's small. When it gets to the horizon and you see a mountain, you know the mountain is huge, so your brain's like, that moon is big. It's the same size the entire time. You can see photographs of that effect. Okay. So we're manipulated. Why is our brain doing this to us? Why does bias just happen to us like this? It's really friggin' useful to have your body act for you. It's immensely useful. You touch that pan and it's hot and your body will stop touching it. Before you decide, I shouldn't burn myself today, I've got something to do. That pan being hot and your body's reaction to it, we're glad that happens. We also want to get out of the pool before we suffocate. We like air. It's important. So you're at a party and you want a beer and you see a beer opener laying on a table. You pick it up and you open your beer. You might not even be consciously aware to grab the beer opener because at one point you saw it. So you know it's there. And also, every party you've ever been to, after 20 minutes when the beer is there, you know there's a bottle opener near the beer. Like, that's just going to happen because someone needs it. So you're going to grab it. But that is based completely on the environment of being at a party, right? If you're at some stranger's house and there's no beer around, you might pick it up, but you might not. If you're hanging out with me at Roaring Camp next to the anvil, when I just made that thing, you are not going to touch it. Because if you touch it, you will burn yourself severely, so quickly that you won't be able to react fast enough not to hurt yourself. You won't consciously be aware when it's okay to touch this thing. Your body will kind of help you out, and your mind will help you out to get the context right, so that in one environment it's a dangerous thing, in one environment it's not a dangerous thing, and it's not even a choice. It will happen. This is very, very useful for us. Unfortunately, there are side effects. And the side effects is that whatever our body's kind of telling us, and our feeling and our emotion and our subconscious is telling us, we just kind of, it affects us all the time. So, we have 4 doors that will kill birds. Behind these doors are 4 things that will kill birds. So we'll just step through them, and I'll read the horror that they represent. Nearly 3.7 billion birds a year are killed due to an emission from a certain type of offshore drilling known as bulk uncapped thermal transfer. At least one species of bird was rendered extinct because of this. Is anyone here, now that you know that, is anyone here happy with the idea of restricting that in some form? Canceling that ability or restricting it? Potentially, yes? Good. Nearly 3.7 birds a year are killed due to ambient heat anomalies from the industrial solar plant farms. At least one species of bird was rendered extinct by this. Knowing that, would you support banning this technique, or at least mitigating it somehow? Of course. Nearly 3.7 billion birds a year are killed due to wind turbine farms due to their high-speed props. At least one species of bird has been rendered extinct by this. Knowing that, would you support banning or at least severely modifying how we do wind turbine farms? Of course. Nearly 3.7 billion birds a year are killed due to cats, along with another 21 billion mammals every year. At least one species of bird has been known to be rendered extinct by this. Knowing that, would you support banning these animals or at least tightly regulating them? Yes! I see the dog people raise their hands. Every year, now by the way, these numbers are very challenging to get, but the multiplication factor is pretty clear.
Oh my gosh.
That's bird deaths by year average by each of these methodologies. We have about 2,000 birds. You know that 2,400 birds died in the Exxon Valdez disaster. Really small when you think of 20,000 birds die a year in solar farms. 200,000 birds, by the way, this varies from 100 to 345,000 birds for windmill farms. and it changes as the technology changes. Of course, you know, we have a lot less oil spills, thank God, than we do solar plants, and we have a lot more wind farms than solar plants, but we have a lot of kitty cats. And actually 3.4 billion, 1 billion to 3.4 billion in the US birds die every year because of those guys.
Wow.
So, the emotional reaction we have about cats and loving them and hating this leads us to believe things easier or not easier. And it's not a giant effect all the time. We're rational actors, we can hear the facts and stuff, but our emotional gut kind of leads us a little bit aside. Kind of a small effect with a big consequence. I have some homework for you, and that is to visit this site. And again, at the end, I'll give you a URL that all this stuff is at. Implicit.harvard.edu. We're going to walk through what this is, but it's an online course to show you how horrible you are. It's so much fun. So we'll talk about, since this is the League of Women Voters meeting, we'll talk about sex biased. So what they do in this, you can do this on race, you can do this on lots of things. And basically what you do is you're going to answer questions really, really fast. And your subconscious bias will alter the results such that it can be detected and you can see how horrible you are. It's really not good. I did this morning and I feel horrible. Okay, so what they do in this test is really simple. They come up with 5 words that are just categories, right? And they take male, female, humanities, and sciences. They're not correlated with each other. These two are opposites in some regards. Those two are opposite in some regards. So if I tell you father and uncle and brother and grandpa, you know that's male. You know, it's not a judgment there. There's some differences in the world, but in general. If I tell you female, you can take mother, aunt, sister, grandma. Humanities, we can talk about arts, music, English, history. And in sciences, we can talk about chemistry, physics, astronomy, biology. I mentioned earlier, thanking my wife, she had this great conversation. She has a bachelor's of arts in psychiatry. Psychology? Psychology. What did she do in her degree in psychology? Well, she did tests. She spent a lot of time in the math department. She made studies of scientific endeavors on people. But it's in the humanities, or at least at the time when she was in school, it's in humanities. So at one point she said, wait, why am I getting a bachelor's of arts? And then the professor said, a really great guy, said, oh, it's a soft science. Soft science. It's a female science? What do you mean by soft science? Okay, so I didn't put that one up there because that's too much weight and it was too much fun to talk about. Okay, but those ones are pretty clear. So the first thing you do is you just take on screen, and you can use your keyboard, and you basically have your left hand is on a key that represents the left side, and the right hand is on a key that represents the right side, and you show the word male and female, and you're set. You're going to show words as quickly as possible, put them in the right spot. These are going to be these words, right? Mother, you throw it over there, aunt, throw it over there, father, throw it over there, and just do it really, really fast. Would anyone have trouble with that? If you do it fast, you have trouble. It's weird. I had more trouble with the sciences. So then they do it again for humanities and sciences, and again, it's the words that could be classified pretty easily. It was a little hard. I kept on getting biology in humanities. Don't know why. Maybe I know more, maybe something's going on in my brain about bias. Yeah, it is. So that's no problem. You do this a couple times. They swap the words on both sides, the left side, the right side, that you don't have a deviation with the sides. Then they do this to you. It's really hard. You just got to do that. It's not a big deal, right? You know English is in humanities and father's in the male area. You know astronomy is a science. No problem, right? And then they swip them around for you and do it again. I don't have the slide. Sorry. I don't have the slide for this. Maybe I'll bring it up in Q&A. But a majority of the population of the United States is moderately this way, meaning that the majority of people see a correlation between humanities and female and male in sciences. And you will too. I'm sorry. You don't think you will, huh? Take the test. You will. And I do have that form for feedback. If you were a deviant from that, I definitely want to know, and I want to hang out with you more so you can rub off on me. The problem, of course, is that we just are inundated with information all the time, and our body and our subconscious is trying to help filter that. Don't touch the hot pan. Don't pick up the strange object that might hurt you. Don't categorize things into a fight response or a flight response. Categorize them into friend or foe. When I say the guy with the gun that collects guns, you have a thought about that person right away. You don't know anything about them, right? When I say the person that collects butterflies, you have a different thought. Why? They're both collectors of things. I didn't say the guy's using the gun. We have bias in everything we're doing. And this test shows that because the subconscious responds quicker to these things than your conscious. But you being a good conscious person go, I'm not going to put astronomy, well, I don't know, this one is easy to do because this is the deviation we all have as a society. Oh no, animations. I think you get my point. We're going to automatically classify things. We're going to have to think about this one a little bit harder because of our bias. And that little tiny, tiny, tiny difference has a big effect, obviously, big consequence in our society. But it also makes you wait just a little bit until your brain catches it and goes, astronomy is a science. My uncle is a male, and swaps that back and forth. Just do that real quick for yourself and just assign them to the lists. And can you detect it? A computer can, and our society can, unfortunately. All right. You guys are you all familiar with this really kind of cool chart? You don't have to study it. Has anyone seen this thing? We got a copy of it. Oh, good. Then you can study it. All right. What I urge you to do is something Miles suggested to me. It's interesting, it's a fun dinner conversation about Fox News being over there and all that. That's neat. But what's important about this is actually that center point. The higher up you are on this thing, the more facts you get. And we converge along facts. We seem to still agree, as oddly as this is, about facts. Our society has a bell curve point which is actually really useful up there. Spend time up there. Something that my friend Warren said to me, the professor of digital media said, he spends a lot of time in France, and he said, you know what? Engage in newspapers outside the U.S. Know where their funding is and read them. Because the important U.S. news will actually get up there because we are important globally. So I don't have a lot to say about that. But just like the cat thing and the oil thing earlier, when your first reaction is an emotional one, you're led by not your thought process and you don't have the facts in front of you, check yourself. Be aware of emotionally where you are when you're engaging in stuff. And try to buffer your subconscious from building up more bias using your mind. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll do Q&A. And Miles is going to come up here. And let me just move over to the front of the... Well, I'll stand here. Miles can stand next to me. All right, yes. What's your name?
Paul.
Hi, Paul.
So Facebook is not only using us without our... They're not paying us for it.
They're not paying for it. They're not paying us, yes.
Traditionally, when marketing companies want to do a survey with a group, they pay them.
Yes, so the question...
So they're not paying us.
So the statement, not the question, but the statement is really that Facebook's currently using us for their market research all the time, or the people that use the service. They're using them for their market research all the time, but they're not paying those people. The trade and the EULA agreement, of course, says they can do that. And so by using the service, that's how you're compensating them for their time and the service.
Well, there's also that payment in the amygdala. Like, people are on Facebook because they're seeing, pictures of family. You're seeing news items that get your hackles up, that get that emotional response. Within your brain, that is a payment system. It's not money, but that's how you get back in. It's why people eat junk food. That pleasure, that pleasure principle they go for. That it's not the best thing you've ever tasted, but it's something that makes you want to crave it after the fact, over and over again.
I'm not arguing what
I agree. It's a good
what
point.
the social implications and benefits of Facebook are. It's brought the world smaller and people around the world in common interest together. That's phenomenal.
It is phenomenal. Facebook's got in the social...
They get an A+ for that. What they don't get an A+ for is masking the idea that their customers, which are us, do this for free. And that
Do
their finance,
do what for free?
what they're doing. Use their
Use their
service.
service.
We are-
Let's talk about something. Let's use the same methodology and same concept about using the customer base or the product base in the case of Facebook. Let's talk about it in a company that's a little more friendly to talk about because everybody seems to like it. Anybody here use Netflix? A couple people. So it's the deal is pretty simple. You pay some money, you get videos either mailed to you or on your screen. And we do the same thing, right? We make our service better all the time by seeing what will work. So our gut reaction right now, what Facebook is doing is like, ew, that's really creepy. That was my first reaction in general with A/B testing. But now that I do it all the time, I see the benefits of it. Instead of me and Miles, if Miles working at Facebook, or me and Jordana, a friend of mine at Netflix, instead of us going, you know what would be great for everybody? This. And subjugating our will about the colors or the interface, all that, to the customer base, instead we say, you know what might be better? This. And then we put it out there after a while and see if it's better, right? So there's this like lack of egoism in that. There's this thing that's like, wow, that's really cool. It worked better for people. And the way we measure that is the real good question. The question is really about the measurement, not actually the situation, right? If you have a deli owner downtown and you go in there and they have sandwiches all the time and they're like deciding that the bread should be that thick, and that's the decision, they do it because their grandmother did it and that's the way it's going to happen, the bread's going to be this thick. Some people are not going to enjoy those sandwiches much as if there was less bread, or for me, no bread. So that separation of that person running that little deli, if we had them do a survey of their customers and they say, hey, there's no payment, just what do you prefer? And they found out, wow, there's like 80% of people love thick bread, and then 10% of the people like thin bread, and 10% of people like no bread. Well, now I can actually make 3 choices. My business can run better. That's actually, I wouldn't judge that person. Like it makes perfect sense for them to run their business that way. But in mass, when we're not people, we're not engaging, there's no human face behind it, it's this creepy thing. And that's happening all the time right now. Everything is this giant collection of data and looking at it and deciding how our future is going to be based off of this weird median that's calculated out without humans' involvement. And it's happening a lot, and it is scary, but the problem is that scope, not the actual doing of the small question. It's the scale of it.
There is also one other aspect, if I may interject, which is the what is the goal? Now, in the tech industry, I've witnessed it myself. I've probably been guilty of it myself, of that notion of, well, we want customer experience to be better, so we're doing these A/B tests to see what makes people happier. But that's not exactly what they're going for. Because let's say, for example, and I'm going to use Facebook or even Netflix as an example. If you had a choice of making someone happier and it was making someone less depressed, but less depressed people ended up not being online or watching movies and deciding instead to go outside or engage with social events, that would be contrary to the financial goals to that company. So there is actually a fiduciary incentive to treat that A/B test as a negative, even if it is a cultural good.
Yeah, it's really that goal that's the tricky part, right? I mean, you kind of get, like, I don't feel bad, maybe I work there as well, I don't feel bad that Netflix's goal is to make customers stay with the service. Seems pretty viable, right? Facebook's goal is to make them engage in the product. Okay, I guess I understand that. I don't know if it's good for society. We don't have that as for like best way to run government, right? We don't have that one. We don't have the how to get rid of depression. We don't have the how to feel more connected with your neighbors. Like none of those things exist right now. And the reason they don't exist is they're not mass software data analysis systems we can put in place to control us like that. But these ideas are so powerful that I can't imagine them not being used for that flow, that idea of making the human experience better as the goal. How do you make a test for that? How do you
that would be curious. A site that made tests to try to make sure you use the site as little as possible while still going back enough to get them data that you would go out and use them.
Right. Apple, when Apple did the health kit thing with the phones, they have this thing where you can actually do scientific research with people that have the phones, and they've got a whole security methodology around the iPhone to do this. The tests like that were run. And people are researching that. So there are tools, and that's more about like how much motion do they have that day, because it's tracking their movement, right? What does their blood pressure look like every doctor cycle? What's their sleep pattern look like? Metrics that have to do with our health. And that definitely feels like the space where we'll start getting better ideas of that and that kind of research. But of course it means taking a lot of your data, being a part of a study and taking your data and being passed on. And we have a lot of abhorrence to the idea of sharing our medical information, even though in that space we could probably learn a lot about helping people have more fulfilling and healthier lives. Any other questions? Sorry, yes.
Well, can you speak a little bit more to the bias of, you imply that there's a bias towards survival, which is going to be a negative bias, which I also experience in my work quite a bit.
What's your work?
I'm a behavioral pain specialist, so people are more likely to focus on the negative or the fear of the pain, and thereby potentially creating more pain. And so how can we look at the kinds of media that we're getting and begin to tell more about fear? Because that is the most powerful bias there is. I think biologically, how can we get past that?
I got it.
Go for it, yeah.
In the handouts, there was a site on the list called Flack Check.
Yes, I saw.
And that's a good one in terms of just examining the logical fallacies that come up with the various comments that are made. So it's a sister site to Fact Check, where it's not just let's evaluate whether the person's telling the truth or not, but actually evaluating what about it was deceptive, what about it had a lie by omission, what about it had these things. And honestly, I feel that is a lot of practice. It's not something you can just do. It's something that you have to cultivate a habit of.
Yeah, you have to like train yourself on detecting when you're being manipulated and why you're being manipulated. You know, when something is scary, first, especially something that's not actually threatening your life at that moment, or someone you love, when it's scary to you, just stop and go, wait, that's not my conscious mind thinking about that. Why is it scary? Who wrote this to make me scared? Is it important for me to be scared about this at this moment right now? Can I think logically about it instead? Right? So you don't get that situation where we just destroy all the cats in the world, right? So there's definitely that goal for yourself to kind of train yourself to be more aware of when you're being manipulated and how you're being manipulated.
Yeah, horror films are great for that.
I disagree. I hate horror films.
No, that's well, that's the thing though. It's like, why am I scared of this?
Yeah, but that's different. That's like you should. If someone runs in the door right now with a knife, you should be scared and you should get out of there, right? Or attack them or something. Most of our life, the horror response is really not the right response. It's almost never the right response.
I'm not talking about the folks that are like running down into the basement where there are no other exits, that sort of thing. I'm thinking of the reason why some of us are absolutely horrified and stricken by the occult, and other people are just like, oh, well, that's silly. That background that you might have that says, I am really scared, like bugs crawling over someone. A lot of people are like, oh my God, it's the worst thing ever. And some of us are just like, bugs. Especially folks who grew up on farms. Like, really? That's the worst thing that could happen to you? Give me a break. The folks that are deathly afraid of public speaking. And you have many horror films that are built upon that isolation. And the fact that there are more people who are afraid of public speaking than dying. Like, that's a real thing. There are more people that would rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy.
Are there other questions or comments? Yeah.
Well, in talking about biases, I had a friend say to me once, I'm cynical, therefore I'm wise. And I think cynicism is a bias. Does that figure with you?
Yeah. I mean, it's so, cynicism and realism have to do with the perception of what you're thinking about, right? I mean,
well, we had that with skeptics when we had I forgot the person's name.
There's a large skeptic movement online right now. A lot of things happen online that are like, oh wow, there's people that feel that way. Skepticism's really grown quite a bit. I'm a pretty good skeptic. I'm an atheist. My grandmother, who a lot of you know, Shirley Bird, atheist, and just kind of family grew up that way. And so my first reaction most of the time to woo-wee kind of things is like, that's crap. And that's definitely a bias, and I'm definitely losing out on all these wonderful benefits of that space as well. And I play in that area a lot, you know. My wife is trained to be a yoga teacher, and I'm like, some of that stuff just rubs me the wrong. But she's also healthier, happier, has this great community. So I think it's important for us to not be. I need to do more yoga. Thanks, Miles. I think it's really important for us to be checking even the things we strongly believe in and see where do they restrict how we engage in the world, and try to figure out that line.
Now that said, skepticism and cynicism are not the same thing.
Good.
I agree.
Yes, right.
Cynicism is the automatic like or the hipster like I liked it before it was cool, you know, that kind of thing.
Maybe think of that as cynicism. That's great.
It is. It's absolutely cynicism to say something is popular, therefore it is inferior. It is absolutely the cynicism. Skepticism is simply if you feel your heart rate rise, if you feel that, you know, either happiness or anger response, that it takes practice. And I'm not going to say like I'm a master of it, but it takes practice to recognize that it's like, that is where I should stop for a moment and think. Unfortunately, we're human beings, so when that emotional reaction comes in, you are biologically hardwired to not think. So that's why it is a practice.
Yes.
Two things and a question. Facebook doesn't pay us, but they don't charge either. You know, they're a service if we choose to use it. And Cambridge Analytica did pay the initial survey. They paid them $1 to take a psychology quiz.
That's right.
And so that's it.
I have a lot of comments about that. So
My question is, you're talking about when we like something. I like friends' political statements, and so I'm revealing my bias. I got that. But I've never liked an ad. Are you saying that some people are sent ads to like or not like?
Yeah, so ads show up kind of discreetly throughout the Facebook service,
right.
And Facebook can get money on the ad just showing up. You know, like when you go to a movie theater nowadays and you see the Coke commercials in the beginning, you're not acting right then, it's just affecting you, right? So there's value in an ad, obviously, even if you don't act on the moment. So in Facebook, there's a value for just seeing that thing over and over and over again. And then there's another value, a different rate of payment that they get when engagement happens when you actually click on it. And just like spam, some people do respond sometimes. And so on Facebook, sometimes people do respond. Even though they're like, I never respond to ads, sometimes you do. And of course, the service is pretty good about tricking you into it as well. The Cambridge Analytica thing, from a technical perspective, nothing they did was surprising at all from a technical perspective. Because years ago, when they did that survey, is anyone familiar with this? It's in the news, so I'm hoping you guys are all pretty aware of it. Cambridge Analytica created an app on Facebook infrastructure to allow people to answer a question. And when that happened, they were able to get data about that person because that person said yes to this resource. So when Facebook first started, the goal was not for it to be the media dominance of the planet. Facebook's goal was just to share pictures amongst people and share stories amongst people and get advertising for that. And one of the ways to get a popular service boosted off the ground is to give developers, people like me and Miles, ability to write stuff on that infrastructure. So when Facebook first launched, they said, hey, this is this really cool thing we're doing, and hey, if you're a software developer, go ahead and write an app. We'll give you tools to use our system so that you can both better our system by making like a really great game or some other engaging things for our audience, but also by letting you build a product on top of us. So Facebook was designing in the early days to be a platform for developers. Apple did developer platforms. That's why there's a lot of apps on the iPhone, more apps on the iPhone than on the Android device and the Windows device, because Apple was really good about giving tools for developers like us to be able to write things on that platform. So Facebook's initial idea was platform-based. When that came around, I was like, you know, I don't like the idea of putting my stuff in a walled garden online. When I upload a picture, I want access to it later. I don't know if Facebook's going to be around. Maybe it'll go away like Facebook, one of the other MySpace, for example, which is still around, by the way. So what I did is I wrote a little application that just, I registered it with Facebook, and it was just called like Lyle's application. I didn't make it public to anybody else. And when I logged into Facebook, I then gave Lyle's application the ability to do anything it wanted to of my account. So then I went back to my application, and I just saw the data that I could get. And I just started collecting all the stuff that I posted on Facebook. When I put an image up, my little Lyle application would copy the image and put it on its server and put my own database in it. And I ran that, and I had to go and click on it to run this process, and it would do this. And what I found out really quickly is I didn't have enough storage on my service to do that. Because when I said Lyle, Lyle application, get all the stuff that Lyle has access to, it was everything that I could see on Facebook. When I liked something of my aunt's, that picture also got downloaded. And George responded with an image in that thread, and that picture got down. Pretty soon I'm like copying all this data, and I was like, oh, that's annoying. Oh, and I stopped. Little did I know, other people didn't stop. They were like, yeah, sweet, I'll make money off this. So if I was a little bit more cynical, I could have made money off it, but I didn't do that, thank God. So in any case, it wasn't surprising at all that Cambridge Analytica did this. It was built into the infrastructure in the beginning, and it was because of the intent early on for Facebook to grow that they gave this ability. And at the time, why did I not think of that as creepy? I didn't think of it as creepy as it was just a few people I knew sharing pictures on Facebook. It didn't affect the media and the planet and the election cycle. It was just this little thing. It was fun. Other questions? Comments? Yes.
So I get the vast majority of my news from National Public Radio. And, I know that it's skewed mostly neutral but slightly to the left. So I hear people, I listen to the talk shows and stuff, and I hear people who are, who say that, NPR is so biased towards, as though it's like far, far, far to the left. And there's people from the right that are commenting about this. And so I guess I'm just saying, I've had to examine my feelings about I always think I'm not biased. I think I'm right. But not biased at all. But I try to feel neutral. I try to understand both sides, and I think NPR does that very well. And yet, some people still seem to feel, like there's always a guest on both sides. If they can get it. But some people feel that it's just, it's way.
Do most people here, because we all live in Santa Cruz, lean kind of left, like listen to NPR and go, yeah, it's a pretty good source? I would assume that's probably true. Okay, let me ask you something. And this is about understanding the bias. Like, where are other people coming from? You can do this really easily. You have this amazingly strong, powerful bias that blinds you to truth. Right now, I'll show you with one. Trump has done something good. Do you feel that in your gut?
Yep.
Like, no, he hasn't. Obviously he has. He's a human being on the planet. At one point he probably gave somebody a hug. Right? Yeah. But look how easy it is for us to just demonize everything he does. I have no example of it, but I am sure he's produced something that was useful to society. But I don't believe it. That's not a healthy place to live in the world. That place where we demonize human beings is actually not very beneficial. This fight we have is not a useful fight. But here's the really challenging thing. If there's nothing fighting that side, and you start listening to the opposite side that you hate, and you start going, well, maybe I can, you're going to move that direction. And that's tricky, and I don't have an answer for that one. But I do notice in myself, and dislike in myself, the inability for me to feel proud about saying, the president did something good. I don't even know what it is. I just can't say it, right? And there's something wrong about that.
Right.
It's not true.
As a quick side note, with regard to NPR being left-leaning or the like, there also has to be that bias that comes from us being Americans that, compared to the rest of the world, we are right-wing lunatics. What is considered left-wing here, or rather what is considered a conservative government in most of Europe, is a liberal Democrat here.
Yeah.
Like we are. So if you want to look at
conservatives here look like fascists.
Right, if you want to look at what is left and right, go on YouTube and look up the debate between the primary GOP debate between Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush in 80 or 79, or I guess 80 was the election year. And they're talking about immigration and the interaction with Mexico. And it sounds like a Democratic debate today. It sounds nothing like the GOP of today. So the left-right, this is what he was talking about with the chart when I was providing this for Lyle, I was looking it up, was left and right is not anywhere near as interesting as the up and down. Because once you're reporting on facts, the bias has to be, we have this huge mountain of facts, we only have a certain amount of attention span for a typical person, and the amount that a reporter can write, let's put that in. That's where the bias shows up, as opposed to down here.
Yeah, I am very uninterested in taking people that are listening to Fox News and watching Fox News, Daily Wire, that publication. I'm not interested in having them come over here at all. I'm interested in going up there, right? But it's not because of their bias in conservative versus liberal. It's about truth. It's about more knowledge. Yes.
I don't want Breitbart to be more like the Inquirer.
On what you were saying about NPR, and I like NPR and I support it, but it seems to me that over the years they've gotten a little namby-pamby, and now a lot of
Can you define namby-pamby?
a lot of times I turn to Pacifica Radio instead. Now they're definitely biased and unashamedly so, but I find they delve into issues and I go into facts that
It's-
can be verified.
Yeah, what's really challenging about staying in this kind of central point is there's not, unfortunately, a lot of storytelling in that environment. There's not a lot of emotional intensity and fun, right? Like when you listen to Democracy Now!, this engagement of emotion and like cool story and like, oh yeah, and you get riled up. Well, that's actually probably problematic because other people are getting that emotional state too. Instead, listening to the dry facts, oh, boring. You can just read, Reuters all the time or the AP all the time. Just read those things, and you get your knowledge that way. But that's not your entertainment. And the problem is these things are about entertainment, less so. So the more you deviate, it's more about entertainment. I would argue that our entertainment desires should be surfaced in other ways, and our knowledge, should be surfaced by factual, dry stuff.
See, I'm going to disagree with this guy. I don't necessarily see it just as entertainment. I actually think there is a point to have something that's beyond facts, but actual analysis. And analysis is that one step down. When you're getting into the yellow zone, that's analysis saying, we have these disparate facts and here's a general trend. That can have a bias for political purposes, whether it be authoritarian or libertarian or...
Yeah. And when you argue that space is about you learning, not about your emotional charge, about enjoying the fact of learning, not the fact of being entertained.
Right.
And that's that very thin difference. Both learning is entertainment as well. I just like the learning entertainment more than the emotional-led one.
So in your discussion of the 1980 thing on, so what is liberal? What is conservative?
Right, those definitions have definitely changed.
There's a lot of presuppositions, and I just want to share the only time that I could have a real relationship with my horseback riding partner, who is a staunch Republican, and crying out loud, I'm from Santa Cruz, and so the way to do that was we could join on our values, and that's something that it would be interesting to shift this based on values. We both valued our families. We both valued the fact that we worked hard for what we had, and we wanted our kids to be able to have that as well.
Albeit it's very hard to find people that say, I really don't care about my family. But yes.
But right, and so
I don't really like you.
it's interesting to put it in a different, where do we join? What do we all care about?
You've been waiting for a while.
My question is, do you have any more of those emails?
Of this?
Yes.
Yeah.
They are there.
I guess we have exhausted
And
ourselves.
get it online.
I can give you the link. Media bias chart in any search engine will give you this.
And, well, if you're a league member and you get the voter, there'll be a link. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
So I would totally agree that you're talking about entertainment and media, 90% is opinion.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the opinion.
And unlike sports, there's no instant replay. If two managers on the field disagree, they take time out, they go to a screen, and there's instant replay and a decision is made. So I guess my question is, in this chart, is there an instant replay when you hear two stories that
there's
add up?
a few resources for that, actually.
Instant replay is the fact-checking site. That's someone said something, how did that pan out? Was that legit? That's the role of PolitiFact and Snopes and the like. That's your instant replay, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. Yes.
I was just wondering where one's cultural bias comes into this whole picture.
Everywhere.
It seems to be very basic because we live in this Santa Cruz bubble,
Yeah.
and other people live in a far more conservative bubble, and they're influenced by it. And so it's hard in this kind of environment to answer your question of name something good that Trump has done.
Yeah, it's almost impossible, I would say, in this room to do that.
Yeah, and it is possible. However, you really have to work at it.
Yeah.
And
You really have to work against your bias.
And it seems that by United States-wise, this is a very important thing. Whatever your community is, it forms your biases, even if you didn't know you had them.
Well, with that, it's 1 o'clock, so I don't know how long we have the room. I'm willing to keep on staying. Carolyn, you more 10 minutes or so? Okay. Another question or comment? Yes.
I'm sitting here, I'm a late-coming digital immigrant, not a digital native. And I feel I have felt in my 70s and now 80s that the world of that Norbert Wiener introduced us to when I was in high school has come to be. It is the world.
Yeah.
And I remember I would sometimes listen to Geek Speak, which I could barely understand.
We're proud
in
of
an
that.
effort to try to figure out what is going on in this world. So I find what you've said here extremely useful, and I expect to use these handouts
Thank you.
very thoughtfully. And I'm left with this big question. Almost everything that I think matters this distracts human beings from
Yeah.
in what is apparently a now thought to be an inescapable way. And I have spent a lot of time sometimes talking with friends, how can this be used? So it's bigger than the question you have addressed here, although bias, of course, is everybody.
Yeah.
How can this be used to get us to get out of war?
All right.
How can it be
The real
used
problems.
to get us to see to it that there's a future?
So one of the things that happens as we have conversations about technologies, it moves extremely fast, right? Like Miles and I have been talking about weekly about technology before Facebook existed, definitely, right? Before the FireWire report and the death of the FireWire report, right? We span this time in 17 years of a lot of change. And the tricky thing, of course, about technology is it changes so quickly. It's like the only stable thing about it is that it changes rapidly. And engaging yourself such that you can keep up with that is a really hard thing to do, especially depending on where you are in your life. I happened to do that when I was 16 or so, when you're in a still flexible space. My kids do that exceptionally well, much better than I ever did, right? And that's just going to happen. So how we compensate with technology, we will, as a species, grow into. What was the question you had, though, was about? Oh, so one of the things that happens as we talk, though, I get to these points where I'm funked out, like I'm really upset about it, I'm really depressed about it, right? After the election, I'm really depressed about it. And I feel like, is there ever going to be a solution? How are we going to, and I start getting kind of stuck. But I then, so I have to remind myself about a couple things. It is easier right now to find out truth than it ever has been in the world. It is easier for you to learn a new skill than it ever has been in the world. It is, more people are fed better now than ever. Less people die in childbirth than have ever died in childbirth, percentage-wise, right? So there's a lot of great going on, really a lot of it. And we are, we pay attention to that horizon that's horrible because it's dangerous, and our bias is to focus on danger. It's scary, our bias is to focus on. So the things that we should probably be using our intellect for, that our body is telling us about, are these problem spaces. But there are also really wonderful things happening that we should be proud and happy of, and make sure that we fulfill ourselves with those things as well.
Yes. Now also, you have to fight back against that notion of the rose-colored glasses past.
Definitely.
Because, the age that I am, I grew up with the the tropes of you're at the breakfast table and you're reading the morning paper. You know, you're reading the news, you're consuming the news and seeing what's
See, it was a
going
better
on.
time, Miles.
Yeah. Or the people who are on the trolley reading the newspaper and not interacting with one another. So many of these same things are intrinsic to human behavior that have been around for a while. So there's a great need to not vilify
And
millennials for
it's interesting
some
how
of
we
their actions.
compensate, right? We have I've got teenage kids, and we have a rule for a long time: no media at the dinner table, right? Dinner table, breakfast, or any time at the table, no media. And every once in a while, we're like, oh, we have to call somebody, and we'll do it. And then the kids be like, hey, what are you doing? So they call us on it, right? But that rule of no media didn't exist, of course, 20 years ago. But no newspaper might have. In some families that wanted to connect, you might have said no newspapers or no trashy novels or whatever it was that could produce that same effect of disconnection. No TV at dinner. Yeah. Yes?
This chart, and I know it's not your chart.
In no way is
lists
it mine.
Reuters and the New York Times as neutral, factual, original fact reporting. I was in Cuba talking to a Reuters reporter and his view of the fact that we were both saying was very different from
Yes.
mine, because I'm a socialist and he wasn't. So that bias played in. I came back and New York Times reported something that happened in Venezuela that I know was a totally different viewpoint.
Has anyone
So
here been
facts
interviewed?
aren't necessarily without bias.
Yeah. Has anyone here been interviewed like for a paper story in your life? Was it what you expected it to be? Nope.
That's what I said.
No one ever, like when a news story happens, the journalist is writing something, and they have a story to tell, and you're a part of helping them tell their story.
And they also may not have a whole lot of background the same that you did. They may just be coming out, just going, we need to get some information here as much as they can. So
It's really hard to get that. And at the same time, it's easier right now to check those facts than it ever has been. Any other thoughts? Yes.
I'm just curious what you think of the Sinclair News syndicate, if you have any thoughts about what they're doing and
We were looking at
how
my slides
problematic
last
that
night,
is.
And Miles like, you don't have Sinclair here at all. Yeah. Do you have some comments about that?
aside from it being horrifying,
Is it?
Yeah.
Why? I mean, I'm just, I just want to hear.
to
'Cause
have a corporate entity provide marching orders for what is pronounced to be what is purported to be a news organization or a series of community news organizations, I believe is terribly distressing. That the fact that you can have a single message for a wide variety of markets that's all the same marching orders, I believe, is quite honestly propaganda.
Right.
I mean, not ambiguously, not, there's some fuzzy edges. It's quite plainly propaganda. Someone in a corporate office said, I want this message out, and it was sent out.
So let me.
well, okay, but
Now,
I'm going to play devil's advocate for a minute. They say that that's not what happened. They say that this was that it wasn't a news.
Wasn't marching orders, it's available.
It wasn't a news piece. It was a a question that they wanted to ask. They were asking for feedback or something.
Yeah. Well,
so
so let me say this about the landscape we have now. The reason why Sinclair has a giant voice is because they own a whole bunch of terrestrial or traditionally terrestrial television, and now, of course, and radio, and now, of course, digital television and radio. But basically, still
40%.
a government lease of that, right? The FCC lease is the FCC requirements to have licenses and such is about making sure that we have a media system. We have a new way of transferring data. And the only thing that controls it right now is legislation around that. That's why Miles and I are high proponents of net neutrality, with the idea, and I know it's a really kind of complicated topic, and it's not really enjoyable in some ways, but the best way to think of net neutrality in a very simple way is that what Facebook can do with that feed of information, they can control what you see, and they can add advertisers and stuff like that. Your ISP, Comcast or AT&T or Cruise.io potentially, could alter your perspective of the internet slightly to do the same type of thing, unless we have a strong net neutrality where that's not allowed. So the answer of, yes, they have these horrible dominance of FCC-regulated space. We have secondary resources for information as long as we maintain some control of that not being falling in the same hands of ISPs.
there's also that aspect of there's some motions by the FCC to try to weaken the cap on how many stations Sinclair can own. They're at 40% now. The push is to have it where they would be open to be able to take over as many as they wanted to, which would predictably go to about 80%.
And keep in mind though, so my kids do not have television at their house. They have Netflix at their house. They do not read news through Sinclair because they don't have that feed in their home. And that is going to get easier and easier to do to not engage in terrestrial television. It's not like that right now. In 30 years, terrestrial TV will be a lot less dominant. Like, its dominance is at the highest point it will ever be. It'll always decrease from here on out. So yes, it's horrible that they're like that. And it slowly over time will be less and less important.
But it was the point I was trying to bring up was the fact that there are a lot of folks that say, I don't really care about politics. I don't want to get involved in politics.
Yeah.
And I understand the impetus behind that statement, but it's that notion of just because you ignore it doesn't mean that it won't come for you.
Do we have any Sinclair stations around here?
I don't know, actually. I don't.
I think in San Jose.
Yeah, it's not
San
not as
Francisco.
high a concentration as many other parts of the country. There's a very distinct pattern of Sinclair being in more conservative and just outside of the major population areas.
Thank you.
So I want to invite you one more time. If you this URL, there's a link there for giving me feedback. If you don't feel like telling me directly, like what I could improve and all that, I'd really love your thoughts on it. It would help me. Yeah, I can take a picture of it. And also the slides there. The very last slide on my set is links to the things I pulled information from. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.